On Monday morning, this woman, Amy Cooper, called 911 and reported that an African-American man was threatening her. The man, Christian Cooper, filmed the call on his phone. He had requested that she leash her dog, something which was required in that area of the park. In the video before making the call, Ms. Cooper warns Mr. Cooper that she is going to tell them that there's an African-American man threatening my life. Many people have read a lot into this, leading to Miss Cooper, who is apparently fairly liberal, being cancelled, fired, dragged on social media, and perhaps even losing ownership of her dog. Did she mean it that way? When we're all used to cop language from police procedurals, African-American male is normal parlance, so probably not. But in the American context, there is an implicit threat there when a white woman reports a black man to the police. On Monday evening, that implicit threat was made explicit. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, a black man named George Floyd was killed by police. Police responded to a call from a shopkeeper about someone trying to pass a counterfeit bill. They arrested Floyd. Surveillance video shows him being compliant with police, but cell phone video from later on shows a police officer kneeling on Floyd's neck for 7 whole minutes. Floyd repeatedly says, "I can't breathe," and then, "I'm about to die," which he does. And then, with grim predictability, the shit is on fire.
Are you listening? Damn.
Engulfed in flames, ladies and gentlemen. I have never seen anything like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Blow. This motherfucker gonna burn down at any moment. Everything's falling. It's hot.
It's engulfed in flames, ladies and gentlemen. I have never seen anything like this.
So what possible insight could I, a somewhat plummy-voiced Brit from across the pond who's white, have into this situation or into the African-American experience? Not a great deal, but with distance can come perspective, a different point of view, a different way of looking at things. And besides, I think we all know how this is going to go. People will go digging into Floyd's background and they'll find various unsavoury things and they'll use that to excuse the police and say that it was a proportionate response. We know that the militarisation of the police in the US is an issue. It's created much more of an us and them sort of attitude, which also infects the US military, which is why they're not particularly good at occupation. We know that's going on. There is racism. What amount of play that has here, there, or anywhere, we don't really know. It's very hard to drill down to the statistics, perhaps because people are deliberately obfuscating them. We know that everyone else will make a saint out of Floyd. And we know that white supremacists and even otherwise sane, sensible, level-headed people will point to the riots and throw up their hands and say there's no helping these people, or ask questions which are pertinent but also kind of silly when you spend a little bit of time thinking about it, such as, why are they smashing up their own neighbourhoods? I mean, you might as well ask why prison riots take place in prisons, why prisoners smash up their prison. You might as well ask that. And of course, there's all the extenuating circumstances here, the massive unemployment in the US, the coronavirus, meaning even a lot of people who could be working aren't. They're at home, and this is like a release to them. And the capacity to get things they need, which is why it's so rapidly turned to looting. Again, need is quite a fluid term. Want might perhaps be better. But when you're impoverished in a society of plenty, it's particularly aggravating, which is why people look at the wealth gap. But it doesn't really matter what's true, whether Floyd was a Satan or a saint. What the woman in the park really meant. She's already cancelled, the riots are already taking place, and it doesn't really matter what's true. What matters is the perception of what's true. The facts will only take us so far. It is virtually impossible to drill down to the actual statistics on exactly how bad it is for the African American community in terms of the police. I've had a go. I am not a mathematician or a statistician. I rely on the reliability of the stats that I've been able to find online, but I have made a crude attempt to get some definitive statistics and also to control in a very crude way for poverty, which it is my personal belief is the driving factor in all of this. So in 2019, the last year for which we have the complete statistics, 370 white people were shot by police, regardless of circumstance, and 235 black people were shot, regardless of circumstance. Now you consider the size of the white population and the black population, that looks really terrible. But you have to control, and I believe you have to control for poverty, which is often a proxy and a strong determiner of the level of criminality, bad encounters with police, and so on. There are a whole host of other factors that would need to be controlled for. I'm not the man for the job, but I have done my best here. Now, the poverty rate amongst white people is 9%. That is, the government considers about 9% of the white population to exist at the poverty level or below. In the black community, it's 22%. So I think we can already see how that's going to kind of soften the blow, though it does throw up some other issues with American society. Now, when you break that all down, the amount of deaths, control for poverty, about 2 in 1,000 poor white people are shot by police each year, though it has been on the decline in recent years, and about 2.5 black people in 1,000 are killed each year by police. So I think while there is a difference, and there is a difference state by state, and it's exactly the kind of states you would think where it's more disproportionate, I think it's possible to see there that far and away the biggest influencer in all of this is poverty, not the colour of your skin. Now, from an outsider perspective, it's easier to see this. From within America, I think it's much harder to see this because race is so important in American history and American politics, but it covers over, it covers up, it papers over the obvious wealth gap, the class inequality that takes place in America, which sells itself on this whole American dream idea. the black population is disproportionately poor because they started out from a worse position, and also there's a disproportionately large amount of immigrants and so on within that community who go to the States, start with nothing, try and build themselves up. But when you look at social mobility in the States, economic mobility in the States, despite it selling itself as the land of capitalism and freedom and the place where anyone can succeed, social mobility is catastrophically bad in the States. So once you're in a poor position, it is very hard to make your way out of it. But that's not the story that grabs people's attention. You know, the guy who made it, who started in the gutter, who started in the ghetto, that's the thing that grabs people's attention. That's the success story, the survivor bias that then infects the culture as a whole, and to a lesser extent the same thing happens here in the UK. But in the US, the prejudice that we have against poor people, the prejudice that we have against the working class, has become entangled with race. And it's a lot easier to see from outside the US because all those negative stereotypes that we're all going to see paraded soon about black people going ape and smashing up their neighbourhoods and all the rest of it. Here it's less to do with race and much more to do with class. It's the working class, it's the hoodies, it's the council estate rabble, regardless of their colour or their race or the point of origin, that receive the brunt of the prejudice here in the UK, where class is much more entrenched as a concept. In the States, race and class have become conflated. And this isn't to anyone's benefit. Blackness becomes associated with poverty, and poverty with crime. So they take an unfair brunt, albeit not that much. But also when aid is flooded in, it's often done on a racial basis, which means it leaves behind the white working class, who then become aggravated and jealous and feel betrayed, and that fuels racism, and that's what gives you the rise of people like Trump. But this is all statistics and science and data. It doesn't cut through, it doesn't get to people, it doesn't answer the problems that they're having or feel that they're having. And unless you can either make them understand that or address the things that they think are happening, the injustices that they think are being served upon them, you're not going to get anywhere. None of this is new. All of it we've seen time and time again in history, even in relatively recent history. If you look at the fall of the Berlin Wall, a big part of what drove the collapse of communism was that the East Germans could see the prosperity of West Germany and became dissatisfied with their lot. So now you consider in an urban setting, London or New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, you have pockets of abject, inescapable poverty surrounded by plenty. And there's a feeling that you cannot succeed in society, that everything is against you, that the only way to get out is sheer brute luck, or outlandish talent, or criminality. And it's only natural that people will turn to looting and theft and mugging and ways to escape drug use, alcoholism. We have the solutions to these problems. We know what works. One country or another around the world has tried or does do the things that work. Prison reform that's based upon reforming the prisoner rather than purely punishing them. Pouring social investment into impoverished areas to bring them up. Encouraging people to buy in to how things are run locally, to give them some sort of civic pride in the area around them, to involve them in the decisions that are made, and then to see the outcomes that happen. You know, we know all this. We know that for every pound spent on social investment, a lot more is saved in terms of policing, that policing is ineffective, but there's all these psychological problems around it. People would rather spend more to punish someone than spend less to reward everyone. But there's got to be some sort of way around this. And in the wake of this, and with the virus going on and the recession that's going to follow, you know, we have an opportunity to reshape society, to make it fairer, to demand that the ultra-wealthy actually pay their share, invest back into the societies that support them, which they don't do at present. There's an appetite for change in the people which is not present in the leadership. And there's a dangerous thing going on where populists are pointing at people to blame rather than trying to find solutions to problems. And we know where that leads from the 20th century. And we also know that revolutionary movements are vulnerable to being taken over. There's a lot to be said for gradualism, for very slowly shifting our society one bit at a time. But when you're in crisis, you do things in a knee-jerk way, and it's often a wasteful way. So we know what works in terms of education, social investment, infrastructure, prison reform, welfare. UBI looks incredibly promising. Are the governments that we have in place, captured as they are by plutocrats, going to make the changes? And are the people rioting in the streets going to wait? Are they going to appreciate those changes as they filter through? Do they believe that there's going to ever be any change? You know, Obama promised hope and change and delivered nothing. Trump promised the earth to the white working class who had felt disenfranchised and angered. And they're the butt of so much of the recrimination from what passes for the left in most political discourse around the world now, which only feeds the resentment and the racism and the violence. There's nobody reaching out across the lines, and it's very hard to do so. But we know what works, so why aren't we doing it? You know, this is the big question, and I am so frustrated with people who just want everything to go back to normal or want to open up in the midst of a pandemic. If your economic situation is such that doing the right thing to fight a pandemic may result in something worse than the pandemic, then the answer is not to sacrifice people and go back to work. It's to reform your system so that you can deal with situations like this. And so you can hold off things like these riots, and so that people feel that the police are fair, and that everyone has a fair shot, everyone has a chance of success, everyone has access to the things that they basically need. And that's far more effective than any number of riot cops with tear gas and water cannon and whatever else. We face a very stark choice at this point in our history. UBI or something similar, a new reform, a new fairness to society, in whatever form that takes, fully automated luxury communism, whatever, or the guillotine and the brown shirt, and I know which I prefer. Live long and prosper.
Une manie de vieux garçon, moi j'ai pris l'habitude d'agrémenter ma solitude aux accents de cette chanson. Quand je pense à Fernande, je bande, je bande. Quand je pense à Félicie, je bande aussi. Quand je pense à Léonore, mon Dieu, je bande encore. Et quand je pense à Lulu, là je ne bande plus. La bandaison, papa, ça ne se commande pas.